Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And tonight is a repeat guest, Jimmy Moglia, who's a longtime friend of mine and also a producer here at TBC TV himself. And my regular guest scheduled for this evening isn't here, so we pressed Jimmy into service again as he's so easy to convince. Thank you, Jimmy, for coming.
I don't know how to take that, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Because he's so deucedly interesting and has so many things to talk about that he's up on. A very interesting individual, and we've talked about him a lot in the past, but we're going to cover something about his personal history before we start talking about Ukraine on March 12, 2015, and other things that come up that Jimmy might have some views on, because I value your views and your opinions, not just because you're objective, but because of your fine mind.
Because you mentioned the word opinion. I cannot help not remembering a quotation by Mark Twain, who says, "In all matters of opinion, our adversaries are insane."
I got to warn you, that's how it's going to be for the rest of the show. Because talk about a Shakespeare scholar. Say a few words right now about your involvement with Shakespeare.
You mean a Rhodes scholar, R-O-A-D. Not a scholar. Yes, I'm finally, after too many years now, I can perhaps arrogate to myself the title of Rhodes, R-O-A-D scholar. But my passion for Shakespeare and literature goes a long way. See, because when I was when I was younger, more young than I care to remember, quote, I studied Greek for 5 years and Latin for 8. But only to discover that potential employers were remarkably uninterested in dead languages. So
Is that how it's been for the rest of your life?
And so I had to do something else. So that's why I took a degree in electronic engineering, and that brought me into various places in the world, geographically speaking. And then eventually I had to go into business of my own simply because, and that's where the Shakespearean element, the root of my Shakespearean addiction has a strong corporate flavor, you see.
A strong corporate flavor.
Because when I returned from Europe to the corporation that was employing me, I found that the language used just as in politics today, the language that was used had acquired a very strong Orwellian flavor. For example, you would call a spade, but it would have been called in the language that I had to learn would be an upward, downward, dynamic and portable soil management tool. So faced with that option of having to learn this new language, I said I can't. So I resigned, and so I had to go and work to business of my own, which I did for over 20 years. And now I stop because I already go into an extended monologue.
Which is one of the reasons I love you. But let's follow my format for a bit here, Jimmy.
You asked me to speak about myself.
Yes, of course. And your full name is Jimmy Moglia, pronounce it the way you pronounce it in your family?
If you are here, anyway, is fine. Most people call it Moglia. People who have an inkling about that maybe the G is there by mistake, called Molia, but the actual sound would be a Y. However, to expect an Anglo-Saxons to master the sound of the Y would be too much. So anyway, it's fine.
What would you prefer me to address you as?
As you like. Jimmy.
Jimmy. That takes care of that. If I were to ask your best friend, Jimmy, who is Jimmy? What would your best friend say? Be your best friend now. Jimmy is what, or who, or what?
This is a tricky question to all your guests.
Of course it is.
Sometimes I get up in one mood and I find that I'm one way, and sometimes I get up in another. I'm really uncertain about self-definitions.
When you say I, you're talking about who Jimmy is. I wanted you to be your best friend and pretend you're your best friend. Jimmy is what?
I would find so many things wrong with me that I would hesitate.
Again, okay, I'll pass that. You're still talking about yourself instead of pretending to be your best friend.
My best friend would say, exactly. He would find so many things
Be
wrong.
your best friend. Jimmy is?
Anything you like.
Okay. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Turin, Italy, many years ago.
How many?
Enough.
Okay, one more trick.
I will answer Shakespeareanly.
Please do.
Though not clean past my youth, there's yet some smack of age in me, some relish of the saltness of time.
Will you say that again? Because
Though not clean past my youth, there's yet some smack of age in me, some relish of the saltness of time. In other words, I am still alive.
And I see it.
And active.
And I experience it. And I love it.
I bow.
Can I ask you another trick question right now instead of waiting and surprising
you
later?
as long as you don't expect an answer, yes.
Help. Control room, help. They're waving their hands. Okay, you ready for it?
Of course.
Why were you born?
It's a quick. I've listened. I watch your shows, and the best answer you have to ask my parents. I'm sorry, but it's the only answer I can have.
Why would they say you were born?
I have no idea. I never asked them the question.
Okay. Okay. Anything significant about your cultural or national heritage worth mentioning?
Everybody's national heritage is worth mentioning,
Okay.
for good or for bad.
Okay.
Because you asked me and because I'm trying to say something which is not the same repeat thing.
It doesn't matter because so many people will see this show who haven't seen you before, Jimmy.
Well, then it doesn't matter. Anyway, having grown in a, I would say, European with a Latin flavor culture and having been transferred into an Anglo-Saxon strongly culture, I've been able to look at both sides of the cultures and draw my own conclusions.
And what are they?
None. No.
It's impossible tonight.
No. Less seriously. There are two complementary cultures, and were it not for this business of these fake artificial conflicts and class struggle in reverse, whatever you want to call it, there will be a lot to gain by the confluence of two cultures that have significantly different flavors, but that are complementary at the same time.
Yeah. And a religious preference today, do you have one today? And that's okay, you don't have to answer some questions if you don't want to answer them.
I would say I respect all religions while belonging to none.
Did you ever belong to one?
Yes, I grew up a Catholic, and I owe them.
Bless you, my son.
Thank you. I owe them.
I've been there, done that.
I owe them quite more Latin than ever I would have learned at school, because of course when you are grown up in school and you go in a Catholic environment, you are taught these psalms in Latin, which you don't understand much what they mean, but the sound is sufficient to be inculcated into the mind of a young person.
Introibo ad altari Dei.
Well, I'm touché, you know. So I surrender. Now, but you're right. Yeah. So, but that's not the only reason. I think that Catholic Church responds to the spiritual needs for many people. So I'm born. Besides, the churches are beautiful. There's
yes.
when I have the occasion of going to Italy and and I end up in one, particularly the lesser-known monasteries. There is a spiritual air about it which is difficult to put into words.
Yes.
So in that sense, it would be I would say unwarranted to confuse or to compound the political historical nature of the Catholic Church with the principle that lies behind it. So
Yeah.
that'd be my view.
Notre Dame, you mentioned some of the less famous cathedrals or churches that you've been to. Anyone come to mind now?
Yes, in fact, 2 years ago, I will be as concise as possible. 2 years ago, out of reading
Go ahead.
which is it's almost a paradox, an oxymoron to be for me to concise. But anyway, 2 years ago, after reading, I wrote a little article in a middle-age magazines that I receive regularly. I received the last yesterday, and I saw a description of a monastery in the middle of Italy, in the region of Umbria. That was a relic, was established at the time of the Longobards. We were talking about the between 900 and 1100 AD. And so I was curious. I said, it looks very interesting from what I read. So I found out what it was, and I also discovered, to my satisfaction and surprise, that they converted the abbey part. The abbey has remained the same, but the convent itself had been converted into a hotel, and it was absolutely beautiful. In fact, they kept everything except it was very modern. And so even the name of the rooms, which are of course the cells, had retained the name of the original friars. So mine, translated into English, would be I was in the room of Brother Mild, which makes sense because I'm a mild person. However, the beauty of this place was in a remote valley off a fairly remote valley. So the silence was beyond description, but not only the silence, the whole environment of the convent and the abbey, the beautiful frescoes that they have in the abbey, was such as to say, oh, thank God that people thought about God at one point in time.
Yes, yes. Obviously, it impressed you
Very
as you
much.
talk about it now.
Yes.
Can you put some words, a word or two, to the feelings that you were experiencing at that time?
Well, it's one of those things that it's one of these not rare cases where it is difficult to relate on the spot something that one feels without being obvious or without saying things that everybody feels. Like a feeling, a sense of the cosmos of things. It really does. It doesn't reflect very well what one feels. Besides, every person does it differently.
Of course.
How impressed by. However, that was you asked because you mentioned that was my most recent, I would say, out of the run of the mill experience as far as churches are concerned. But of course, the cathedral, they overwhelm you with the spiritual power, which is one.
Spiritual. Would you characterize the feeling as something akin to spiritual?
Anything which is not to do with the body.
Okay, enough of that. Yeah. How about your formal education? A few words about that.
As I said,
You went to school, huh?
I went to school. I wasn't a very good student, but I studied Greek for 8 years and Latin for 8, as I mentioned before, which is true. So after that, I entered a period of life during which it is usual to become, for most young people, become bohemian, meaning. So I became a musician, and it took me twice as long as other people do to get a degree. But in the meantime, I was traveling the world playing, so I acquired a pretty good feel for the world as a young person, and because one of the subjects that we talked today, I even ended up playing in Ukraine when it was still the Soviet Union. So you may.
My gosh.
In Odessa, actually, not all of Ukraine.
Odessa.
So.
You have had one heck of a life, haven't you?
everybody's life is a heck of a life as long as you think about it. But in the instance, it was a combination of occurrences they couldn't possibly anticipate. So, so when I picked up the guitar, I never thought I would end up doing what I did.
And it was a guitar you played?
Yes, and not only that, but I have had even the cheek of presenting myself as a country and western singer.
You're kidding me.
Well, I told you before. So
sing me something in country.
Oh no, I would have to bring the guitar. But anyway, however, if you go on my website, there is if I go on YouTube, there is I usually at Christmas I send up what is called the French called the Son et Lumière, sound and music. Greetings to all my friends toward Whirlwild. So I make a nice picture of Oregon, views of Oregon with the So if you can find how I play and sing, go to the YouTube and you will find it. But I will not recommend you, but still, if you wish to, you can. So, so anyway, out of this, that is part of my interest, and I'm not trying to drift into the subject that we talked about, that we would talk about. But part of my interest in Ukraine, which is sincere, which is true, stems from my first experience in the Odessa. I still remember this, the staircase there, the Potemkin staircase. It's not staircase, the stairs that go up the river from the sea. And so I became particularly curious about why or how it could be that through totally outside circumstances you could turn what is really a very wealthy, rich in resources and rich in people, turning into a quagmire and essentially a bed of death.
And when did you stop working for somebody else?
In 1985.
Mm-hmm.
85. So 85, 95. And then I retired in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And that I got myself to only write and keep up my website, which now is almost 500 articles.
500 articles?
Yes, and it's I'm not saying but just anybody who's on the website for about 3 years, unless you offend people right and left, you have got a big good audience. But there are some days where I get pretty good picked up audience.
When are you going to talk a little more about your publications? Will you do that now?
Well, I've written the published books, if you like.
Yes.
There is the Shakespeare book, and out of that came the interest from the government of Tuscany to ask me if I could do the same thing for Dante, for Divine Comedy, which I did. So it came up about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And this week, a blog in Italy, which is a fairly well-attended blog, because it's a subsidiary of an international blog, Countercurrent, has published my book in Italian, which is a counter-history of the United States. It's along the line of Howard Zinn's, but it has more of a different flavor.
And Howard Zinn's...
People History of the United States. Yeah. It's along the same theme, but it is with a different type of research. So in that, in fact, I hope not to offend anyone, but it's called... and it's, I'd say not to offend anyone because doesn't matter, it will be too long. But anyway, the title is... in Italian, USA is called USA and means use. Mm-hmm. And so if I translate the title is Use and Dispose.
No more of those this evening.
But it's not, as one may surmise, not that it doesn't matter anyway, because you can say, these days you can almost say anything. But it's not anti-American book. It's just bringing to light some interpretations of events that usually in the canonical history books, of what I know of them, are either overlooked or underplayed or hidden. So either way, it's a kind of putting things in my own very small, modest view in perspective.
Do you ever sleep?
Occasionally.
You are a busy man to be retired.
Well, yes. I'm busy because I do some of the things that I just couldn't do before, because it's difficult to run a company and become interested. I think at the end, because of the sleep stuff, you have to. But now, in the last 3 years, a part of writing, I also became a little bit more adept at doing things that I couldn't do before, like animations, and even in some of the production that I have now, I make animations.
I'm afraid to ask you the next question, because you can't be that old to have time to do all those things that you've done so far.
I don't know how to interpret that, but let's change the subject.
Are you enjoying life nowadays?
It's a rhetorical question, because no, I'm not saying that you shouldn't ask it, because it's almost like it reminds me in a parallel way of the Declaration of Independence. Is everybody has the pursuit of happiness, which, by the way, was not the Jefferson's original, it was Dr. Johnson's original, but it doesn't matter. The pursuit of happiness, yes, of course, but what does it mean? I'm pursuing happiness. What does it mean? If you start thinking about it, it's not very easy to describe. I enjoy life. It depends. There are some things that I like, something I dislike intensely, and so how can you put that in together? If you try to say yes, of course I enjoy life, it means that what you do not enjoy, somehow you treat it as some of the aspects of the American history you don't want to talk about. So it's one of those things.
If I decided at any moment to just stop and say, am I happy now? By and large, one-word summary of how I am with my existence. I'm glad to be alive, to experience my aliveness. There's a 1,000 different words to describe that sort of a sensation.
That is true. To tell you the truth, that is something I very, very rarely experience. But that's not because of character or genetics or anything. It's because my formative years were shaped by the literature that I was asked to study. And the type of literature I was asked to study was really directed towards a kind of subdued melancholy about life. And
subdued melancholy.
So that has left an influence I would never think about it unless you ask me now, so I've never thought about it this way until this moment. But when I think about it, and I think of some of the literature that I was exposed to and asked to absorb, I would say that was probably the most influential aspect, factor that caused the attitude towards the question, are you happy to be alive?
Yeah.
Because to say, I'm unhappy to be alive doesn't make no sense. You cannot do anything about it unless you kill yourself. But that's not the point. The point is, how do you enjoy the moment? And that is for me, it's not probably as you see it, but it's only a matter of degrees. In practice, it doesn't make any difference.
There are moments, precious moments, when I'm with another human being, and there's something that goes on between the two of us for a moment or so that makes it all worthwhile.
Yes.
And I'm away from melancholia or anything of that nature. I am feeling well, alive, and appreciative of the fact that I can experience you.
But in this we would probably bore your readers, your viewers.
But we're having fun.
You're having fun. But that you can experience also when you look at the daffodils that just grow in my garden.
Yes.
So that is not necessarily it's not the human contact only that creates that
True.
Experience.
True.
The church the abbey that was described before was to me was magnificent.
Yes.
At the same time, it's again we've noticed. I think we have sufficiently discussed the subject.
Okay. Partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, or what?
I live on my own. I have two boys. One is working, the other one is studied in Berlin at the moment. And I live with a cat. And I shouldn't say this, but every evening I have a family of raccoons that comes to get their dinner, and which most people have if they have a house. And just to say this, not to claim particular originality, but only to underscore that I do nothing particularly extraordinary in my life.
Do the raccoons like you?
Indeed, and so does the cat, because the cat alerts me because she goes to the door to wait for them. And every now and then the raccoon puts the nose on the door, because especially if I've forgotten to give them the food. So at that point the cat smacks the glass, and so that's usually a sign that I have to go out.
Okay. Would you hazard a description of your political persuasion on the continuum, left, right, center? Are you off the end, or either end, or what?
It's not off either end. I do not belong to any particular political party, of course.
That wasn't the question.
Never have. But I would say that based on the description that people would say, that people do assign to these things, I would probably find myself a radical, but it's a philosophical radicalism.
Yes.
So nothing. Also, it has to remain philosophical, because at the moment, the tools for expressing radicalism are very few and far between because of necessity or circumstances. I mean, you cannot, even a protest now is becoming dangerous. So, and also there hasn't been a focal person or point that can galvanize the feelings, the movement, the radical feelings that are creeping throughout many people, but they cannot be pulled together, I think. We don't have a Chavez today. No, we don't. There has never been a Chavez, and of the president that have part of a historical context, possibly he was not certainly a Chavez, but the one that was the most consonant to my view was Carter, and they vilified him no end.
Which Chavez are you talking about?
Hugo.
Boy, I'm getting a flavor of your political persuasion that you're not acknowledging.
Well,
he was a radical socialist.
Well, if there's nothing wrong in being a socialist, there is most people in the United States are socialist, except the socialism of the rich, which is not too bad, but it's still socialism. And
if you're rich,
it's a socialism, and so it's in itself there's nothing wrong.
A couple more questions before we take a break, and then come back and talk about Ukraine and other things. Any names of persons from the past or alive today, 2 or 3 people that you particularly admire or admired or look up to? Any names come to mind?
Well, as I mentioned, one is Carter for several reasons. First
Jimmy
of all,
Carter.
yes, during his presidency there was no bomb thrown, no war declared, and no missile launched. So it's a pretty good record for the United States during his none. So that's the only one in the last 70 years. So it's a pretty good record to be. And also, he even recognizing the enormous strain that politically one person, and that even if he is retired, recognizing the enormous strain that he is in terms of what other people will comment about what he says. He has been probably the most vocal and open person in declaring the criminality of what Israel is doing in Gaza and the Middle East and against the apartheid state. Yeah. And that's today in this country it takes great courage to do that.
So you admire Netanyahu.
What can I say?
You're citing persons that you particularly admire or look up to. That was the question.
Yes, he was a person I look up to.
You're still talking about Jimmy Carter?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because of all the things that he has done, and it's remarkable that he has done them, after his presidency. Because we don't read them, but I follow because I bought his books. He's really, you can see, even now he's not young, I mean, none of us is, but he's going to build houses.
Yeah.
And it's a very, even if he doesn't build the complete house, it's very symbolic.
Yes.
Think of all the people in Congress doing something concrete. They will be lowering themselves to the level of the peons, let alone the slaves. So that is what makes a person stand out dramatically against the background of, frankly, I shouldn't say this, but people that I have very little sympathy, let alone admiration for.
Any particular names of people from the past that you don't like or didn't like or are unhappy about their existence?
Of course, the great tyrants. I don't think I have great admiration for Hitler or Mussolini. I have a bit less lack of admiration for Stalin because there were huge problems. But I'm studying at the moment maybe to make a historical sketch, a few sketches on the revolution. I could see how that could have developed some of the problems that occurred in the 30s, but.
Yeah.
But then we would conversation go along into development of the Russian frame of mind and the specific problems that they had at the time when they had the war and also how to keep which is an empire together. People think about the Soviet Union now because it has been dissolved and there are these, but there are the Soviet Union in Russia. There are 80 nationalities, 80.
Oh.
So there were 80 republics, and because of the Cold War and everything else, it always the story was everybody was controlling everything else, but that was not true. There was a control about centralized, which probably was tremendously inefficient, but that's part of the Russian soul. I'm just guessing. I'm just being. But otherwise, there were freedom. The Islamic Republic always been Islamic. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan. They were Islamic. And they never bother anyone. They lived their own life. So to keep together an empire like that wasn't a mean feat. So particularly when there were the means of communications were still primitive compared to today. So we should not put it down too much what the Soviet Union tried to do.
Oh boy, we need 3 hours, you and I, about anything we decide to talk about. You're a delight to visit with. Anyhow, I'm getting signs from the control room that they're going to beat us up if I don't take a break. He's nodding. Okay, we'll be back in a couple of minutes, folks, so bear with us. And we will come back in a few minutes and continue talking about Ukraine and other things. Okay, we are back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. That's where I interview my guests about who they are and whatever it is that they want to talk about. And tonight we have Jimmy Moglia, take your pick, that has been on through the years a number of times because there's always so much to talk about. And each time he's on, I learn more about him and what went on earlier on in your life. And it's so rich and so intriguing, and even what you're about now. But you mentioned during the break something about Ukraine, and that was the subject of the show. So let's start talking about what you have to say about Ukraine.
very quickly, last year I started producing a series of shows, TV shows called Historical Sketches. So, and the last 6 they are 28 minutes each, and the last 6 were about the history of Ukraine.
Oh.
And the reason for my interest in Ukraine are twofold. First of all, I visited Ukraine a long time ago when it was still part of the Soviet Union, but I still have some kind of fond affection about that experience. And secondly, an attempt, because the more you the more you read, the more you learn about what other people thought about the matter. So, in the instance, I was attempting to verify for my own good, so to speak, whether it was true that the West was European, the East was Russian, and whether that was a construct by the CIA in order to create, or whether there was something deeper beneath it that may deserve some kind of attention. But that was my original idea. And then, of course, as one reads through, I've done I acquired more books about Ukraine than I never thought I would acquire. But once gets into it, and then discovers parts that are interesting. Like any country is interested. Any country is interesting,
sure.
By definition, because usually there is a culture, there is a history that leads to the nationality. There are the language issues, and so Ukraine is most interesting because of what happened in general, but also because of what happened in the last 150 years. And of course, those are things that the mainstream media not only doesn't talk about, but even if somebody thought of talking about it, they would be forbidden to talk about. So it is for this reason I find that was an interesting objective to pursue and to make a show out.
When you say the mainstream media, you mean the corporate media?
The corporate media, so the regime media, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
You know. So, and now to condense in 10 minutes 1,000 years of history would be impossible.
Try.
However, unless you say generalities, but there are some interesting parts of it.
Of course.
It's anecdotal, but it's very. After I read it, of course, because I in Italy, when I went to college in the University of Genoa, and in Genoa there are streets that have Crimean names, and so, good God, why? I know there was a Crimean War and Italy participated, whatever, doesn't matter, but there were names of specific cities. That's interesting. Maybe they have an interest in the Black Sea, but then I discovered that during the period of formation of the Ukrainian territory, because it became a state very late. The Genoese had established a whole network of cities and marketing points along the Black Sea, and that what explains why they had all these streets with the Crimean names and Ukrainian, now we can call them Ukrainian names in general. There was an anecdotal aspect. We're talking about the 1200, 1300. But more recently...
So there's been more of a connection or interconnection between those two areas.
Yes, Venice had too, but in that specific instance, Genoa was prevailing with their commercial interests. But probably most people know, Ukraine means borderland, but it was, in fact, it was always a borderland, not very well defined to whom it belonged. But for most of its history, it was divided, at least Western Ukraine, was divided between Poland, Russia, and Lithuania, when Lithuania was a Grand Duchy. So, and then, of course, it became part of the Habsburg, the Austrian Empire. So that experience of, let's call it Europeanness, connected with the belonging to the Habsburg Empire, which was a very important empire, created some kind of a feeling or a collective consciousness, some people call it, whereby they felt they belonged to the European Habsburg Empire. In fact, when after World War I, the Austrian Empire was dissolved, in the Ukrainian, which is now Ukraine, there were people who said, they were regretting the loss of their belonging to Austria. But this was not the main reason for what happened today. Now, as far as nationality is concerned, Ukrainian is very close to Russian. It's like a dialect, and so for a long time, Russia was the main language. They understand each other, and the Ukrainian, which was called Little Rus or Little Russian, was considered a secondary language, a language that could not be spoken of in polite circles, so to speak. Except that in the 1800s, thanks to the revival of the nationalist spirit all over Europe, most countries in Europe were made, including Italy, Greece, Serbia, they were all came to life in the 1800s. In the 1800s, there was, among other people, a poet called Shevchenko, which is the main Ukrainian poet. And he came up with some beautiful poetry, which of course I don't understand, but I must believe that it was beautiful, but it was popular. And he was the one, we could ascribe to him the responsibility of having started the nationalist movement. At the beginning, because it was still...
That was a while ago.
Yeah, 1850.
Yeah.
At the beginning, the Russian Empire, the Tsar, let him be. Then we became a little bit more boisterous. They tried to curb him, but they really did not kill him. So the Ukrainian nationality remained a kind of simmering movement, but never came to fruition. I now skip a lot because otherwise I would have to talk too long. But anyway,
sure.
The very first time when the Ukraine acquired not only a statehood, but a real promotion of Ukrainian nationalities, culture, schools, language, literature, art, everything else, was the Soviet Republic of Ukraine in 1923.
That's when it really started.
And it was in the interest of, at the time, the Soviet Council of Ukraine and the Soviet Politburo in Moscow to cultivate this sense of nationality for one pragmatic reason, but still it was a good reason, because if they feel proud about themselves, they will be proud to belong to this socialist on the so.
As compared to other parts of the world where socialism was not the prime motivation.
Exactly. So this was you could say that it was an interested promotion, but at the same time it achieved what for a long time the nationalist Ukrainians in the 1800s had not been able to achieve. Now,
at the same time, what was going on in China?
Now you're taxing my knowledge. What time when? You mean what time when? Because
in the 1800s.
1800 was, they still had the emperors in.
Yes.
But was only in 1910 that they came with. In October 1910 or 1912 they had the revolution. But anyway, so towards the end of the 1920th, there was a bit of a recrudescence because they think that maybe this Ukrainian, they want to become completely independent, so they brought it back a little bit. Then there was the Great Famine of the 1930s, which was caused for too many reasons. Let's not go into it now.
Sure.
And then, of course, everything was overcome by World War II.
Yeah.
Now, what happened in World War II is interesting.
We've got about 9 or 10 minutes, and you want to get to cover some of what's going on recently in the last 5 or 6 years, so I want to be sure we have enough time.
I can talk about that, but most people know, I think, what happened in the last 5 or 6 years, because after most people know how the U.S. government works now. So if you wish, I can talk about it. But I'll be very, very quick on this point, because it gets to an important point, which I think it is, the question of Crimea. After World War II, there was an immense reconstruction program, and it went ahead, without any support from the West because of the Iron Curtain. So it went very well. And then After Stalin died, Khrushchev took over, who was almost a Ukrainian. He was born on the border.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the Soviet Union did everything possible to encourage again the flourish of the nationalist spirit, and in the context of that friendship, fraternity, whatever, brotherhood, has to be seen the fact that Khrushchev made the statement that I'll give you, out of our good heart, we'll give you Crimea. It was a show of togetherness, so to speak, which now is.
And that was a huge mistake, huh?
It was today it turns out to be a huge mistake, but in the context of, but the whole thing, the real mistake, in my view, of course, in the view of many, I hope, is the idea that you should go into a country and regime change and put in charge oligarchs and implement the class struggle in reverse, which is really what the program of the world is today. So that was a huge mistake. But the fact of having given you Crimea was a gesture, because they were thinking of going from the socialist to the complete egalitarian society. So in that sense, you have Crimea, it doesn't matter. We're all Russians or whatever. We're all part of the Soviet Union.
So what's the difficulty going on nowadays with Russia, the former Soviet Union, and the European Union, and the to and fro, and it seems the West has installed a leadership in Kiev that is determined to pursue its own interests.
Not only, well, they've done it in Kiev, they've done it in Georgia, but it proves one main point that nobody can deny it. Until the Soviet Union, the military organization of the West, the United States and everything else, was set up in order to combat the threat of the Soviet Union, because they were communists, communists as being evil. So, but now...
Why do they say communism is evil? Why does the West say that?
That we would take another 2 hours and tremendously annoy your viewers. But anyway, let's set it aside.
Okay.
But now, Russia is as capitalist as anyone else, and all of a sudden they are just like before. They have to be... So the absurdity, the paradox is there, and it is big enough to, I hope, make people think about it. And that's all the thing that we can hope for, as far as is concerned. So, as part of that mode of thought, that now we have to fight, we have to establish put our puppets everywhere.
Because what going on now in Ukraine be the seed of World War III?
Possibly. If it's not Ukraine, I don't know what will be. But certainly the Ukrainians, I was just reading today, based on the statistics, because you don't have exact numbers, but based on the statistics of the losses, the Ukrainians have lost about 14,000 soldiers dead in this way. And the Novorussians too, they've lost about a few thousand. Plus the number of dead, the number of wounded is enormous. All the money is spent in war, so the poverty is rampant.
So one more question, pursuing my interest here for a moment. The source, the beginning of World War III, or whether it be in the Middle East with Israel and Iran, or one of those people there, or whether it be a silent coup in Washington, D.C., where the right wing will seize power in America?
Actually, to tell you the truth, I think that if I were to, I wouldn't vote, but if I were to vote for president, I would vote for, my mental block, Pat Robertson. You know why? No, don't worry. You know why I would vote for Pat Robertson? Because, and I think people should, because if Pat Robertson were elected, there would be sufficient reaction in the country to say we have to do something. Because otherwise you will get, even with Bush would have been, I mean talk about crimes. I mean, but there is no reaction. But and even with the militarization of the police, with all the killing, there is still no reaction. All the reaction is seen just the New York Times.
Why is there no reaction?
Because there is no galvanizing figure. So there is not there being a galvanizing figure, positive, there can be a galvanizing figure negative. So by having a Pat Robertson in power, negative galvanizing figure, finally we said, no, I cannot take this anymore.
Why is there no galvanizing figure from the left?
Who knows?
I know.
Because it's
And you know too.
what the Greeks would call a tautology. There isn't because there isn't.
The historical fact, they are taken out, they are killed from Hugo Chavez. And how many times did they try to kill Fidel Castro?
Of course,
they're talking about an alternative to monopoly capitalism.
Sure, I was thinking, you asked me about the United States.
Yes.
Okay. But no, there have been I think South America have been wonderful. I mean, Fidel Castro, Chavez, in his own way, Morales, to a little extent, I like him by the use of Correa too. I wouldn't put much faith on the lady in Brazil, but still, it's better than nothing.
Yes.
So, you asked me about the United States, why there isn't a galvanizing figure. I don't know. And this is why, lacking a positive galvanizing figure, the best thing is a worst possible negative galvanizing figure.
Well, I'm suggesting that a galvanizing figure from the left would be killed. Do you believe that?
Yes, but that, it would be, I don't want to wish it to anyone,
Sure.
but it's sometimes martyrdom can have a positive effect too. And I don't wish it, of course I wouldn't wish it.
What's going to happen with Obama in the remainder of his term?
I'm repeating things that people have said for a long time. Obama was a marketing feat, you know.
I love that. A marketing feat by whom or who? A marketing feat.
A marketing feat because it is so as to say that we have there is no more discrimination and racism is dead, which is of course is ridiculous. But that is the marketing part of it. It's a brand. It's the brand. Brand is everything in the United States.
So the people who really run things in our country have someone who they can handle to some degree to pursue their own personal interests and greedy aims.
Therefore, he is like a prisoner. He is a prisoner, not even of his own thought, but he's a prisoner of the thoughts of someone else. That's the only thing that we can deduce from what's happening.
Makes me sad.
It should. It makes all of us sad. This is why when you ask me, you're happy about life.
Did you see his speech, the Selma celebration, and Congressman John Lewis introduced him. He was down there in Selma, and he spoke. I watched through about 7 or 10 minutes of it, and he sounded like the Obama before he became the president. I mean, he was a firebrand.
Well, of course.
Radical leftist.
Not only that, but you remember that before president, he was attending a church of the guy who was pro-Palestinian like anyone else, and after that he put him aside. So that's part of the, with politics. You go in a play, you go to Selma and you praise civil right. You go to Wall Street and you praise turbo-capitalism. You go to Israel and you pray this, we must save Israel. So I think he's fantastically skilled. Nobody will probably...
What about reality and human social responsibilities? Those kinds of people we were talking about earlier.
Those are qualities that are left for the peons to admire, but not for the ruling elite. No, those are drawbacks. As I said, this is why I admire. I mentioned before Carter, because the only one that I can think of that has come up really strongly and coherent with what he thought. After all, he forced Israel to give up the Sinai, which was no small feat. And I know it because I was in the Sinai when it was under Israel, and the guy that was on the bus said, "This is Israel. This is our new Israel," and it will always remain Israel. But Carter changed that.
So you're a Carter-phile for sure.
A what?
Carter-phile. You love Jimmy Carter.
Well, only because in the sense of what he did, not. I think that America lost a lot when they threw him out.
Is the American empire in decline?
Who knows? It depends. If you are one of the Wall Street guys there, I think it's never been better. It depends on the ideology. If the ideology is me, so to speak, me and anyone else don't give a damn, I think it's not on decline. If it's a different ideology, then probably you could say it is.
Is there some time in the near future when the number of bases that America has around the world will be less than they are now?
Oh, I think that they're increasing by the day. They're opening a new one. I would just reading
I said decreasing, not increasing.
And I don't see it in the immediate future because it's a beautiful business. Now, if you're one of those contractors or generals or something like this, they never had it better. I mean, it's wonderful. You can build stuff and throw it away and make money out of it.
Jimmy, our time is about up.
Good.
Okay, we have wandered all over the place, and I've enjoyed you so much. Will you talk to the viewers out there, some final thoughts or words you have that would be useful for them to hear right now about anything that's on your mind?
For what is worth, those who do not follow the regime media, do not follow it. Turn off the television, except Dr. Don and a few others, and read what you can from objective writers or historians that have written about the subject that you are interested in. That's very cheap advice, but still advice.
And it's worthwhile, of course. And I have a few public service announcements that I'd like to grind my axle out. To get my show's local broadcast schedule where you are, go to my website, www.donbayham.com, and click on Present Day Activities to learn how to get that. And to watch my shows on the web, Don Bayham YouTube. Click on a particular show. There's many, many shows, and you might even find an old show with Jimmy Moglia. And we got to tell you about the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be further down the tubes. We need you. Join the ACLU. And to get my shows broadcast by other stations, ask your local public access station to go to pegmedia.org and follow the instructions on how to get my show. Oh, and we got to end corporate personhood. That's the last one we should be showing. Corporations are not persons, and money is not speech. We got to take back our Constitution. Move to amend. Go to movetoamend.org to end corporate personhood. Thanks for watching. And remember, KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly and be charitable to you too, and you too, and you too, nurse. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.